Hey everybody, welcome back. So I had originally planned for this video today to start to be some personal development kind of 101 crash course, key things you need to know that you may have never learned if you've never really spent any time in the self-help world, kind of classic ideas and conceptions that are really useful for your personal growth path and your personal healing path. I've been seeing a lot of kind of beginner questions out there in my different kind of DMs and forums and places that I'm always looking to get a sense of what people want to know more about. And so that's kind of what I had planned. But upon further thought, I realized that that's actually probably a pretty fucking boring thing to talk about. So we're going to throw that out and we're going to talk about something that I think you're going to find a lot more interesting, which is what are the things that therapists are thinking about or aware of or tuned into, or coaches or a hypnotherapist like myself, when you come to work with somebody for healing, for personal growth, for personal transformation. What are the things that they don't tell you, that you don't know about, that's happening kind of behind the scenes, that really impacts the way sessions go? And what is it that you probably should know or expect needs to happen inside a session in order to start to get the results you want to get? So I want to kind of elucidate, kind of peel back the curtain a little bit here and elucidate for you what it is that I'm thinking about when people come to me and they want to work with me and they want help, and also probably help you understand a bit more about why you're stuck with the issue you're stuck with, how come it's been here for so long, and what it is that's going to need to happen in order for you to grow or heal or transform or let go of your issue, or however you want to think about it. What needs to happen? Let's talk about it. Now, I'm going to start off the beginning of the video here with a bit of a blunt, brutal truth for you, because I don't think it really serves you to just kind of operate in blissful ignorance of your own personal healing path and what's involved in that. So I want to give you a little bit of rough truth up front here. So brace yourselves in case you're feeling a bit sensitive or you're feeling like not responsible for your own growth path. As a coach, obviously part of my job here is to challenge you on occasion. So we can consider this a little bit of a gentle challenge from me to you, okay? One of the reasons that you haven't healed yet, that you haven't grown, that you haven't transformed or released the issue or whatever it may be that you want to happen for yourself to progress in life, is that you're doing a lot of things that you probably aren't aware of that are getting in the way of your own healing. And this is the first thing that therapists and coaches generally won't tell you, is that in a lot of ways, they're trying to stop you from getting in your own way any longer. That you are actually working against yourself, your strategies, your thought patterns, your assumptions, your core beliefs, your behavior patterns, your coping patterns, whatever it is that's kind of up in the mix of whatever it is you're trying to resolve, is probably set up in a way that's keeping this whole thing stuck in place. And so one of the first things that in this case, the hypnotherapist or the therapist or the coach, the helper has to do is really assess and figure out what the heck you're doing that's stopping you from progressing and healing and transforming. So that's point number one. And along those same lines, obviously, this needs to be said. You probably already know this, but just because these dynamics pop up, I'm just going to be explicit and say it here. Your therapist, no matter how fucking amazing they are, your coach, your hypnotherapist, I don't care if it's fucking Tony Robbins or someone of that, caliber. If you're working with someone for personal transformation, you have to be clear. They cannot save you. They cannot fix you. They don't have the power to change you. There are a lot of people who come to work with a therapist or a coach who externalize their power onto the therapist or coach and say, hey, fix me, change me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a mess. Please heal me, fix me, resolve me. And the reality of the situation is that you are capable of healing, of fixing the problem, of resolving whatever it is in your own life. And the reality of the situation is that it has to be you that does it. What the coach's role or the hypnotherapist's role or the therapist or whoever, the change worker's role in this dynamic with you is to help you connect to the places where the healing might need to happen, where the change is possible, help you move and shift yourself in ways you haven't thought of, you haven't considered before, that are going to help you heal yourself, change yourself, go through the transformative process yourself. At the end of the day, that's where inside your nervous system, inside your body, is where the healing and the changes and the transformations have to happen. You are the ground. You are the sports arena where the sport takes place, where the game takes place. You are the environment. You are the theater in which the drama is unfolding. You are the place of resolution. And so all the coach or the therapist or change worker or whatever can do is really support you in facilitating that, because generally speaking, if you're stuck with an issue, you don't know what to do with that. You may realize I need to change, but generally speaking, again, people tend to externalize their power. They tend to have this kind of, parentification of someone who may know more about this process and kind of, project outwardly this, from an inner child place, this kind of save me daddy, save me mommy kind of thing. It doesn't work like that. Nobody can save you but you. It's just our job as change workers, coaches, hypnotherapists, whatever, to support you in that, to ask the right questions, to direct your attention to certain aspects of your experience, to help you connect the dots between things you haven't thought of before, and to lead you through processes that can be deeply healing or transformative and give you that sense of support and presence and reinforcement that makes it safe, that makes it known, that makes it clear, so that you're not kind of stretching out into this unknown territory by yourself. That's what our role is. Our role is really to contain you, to support you, to tune into you, to pay attention to you, to connect you back to yourself so that you can do your own healing work. Okay, and with that said, I want to just acknowledge that those last points are a little bit kind of obnoxiously preachy and pretentious and whatever. And I apologize for that, but they really are important things to understand and internalize for yourself. With that being said, I want to kind of pivot our conversation a little bit here and kind of tell you what actually needs to happen in your process in order to start to move things in the right direction and start to heal. And I want to clue you in to one of the most obvious things. When I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah, of course. But I think is very often overlooked or underarticulated if you're looking at content about psychology and personal development, that kind of a thing. And that is that fundamentally, one of the universals of when we have an issue or a problem in our lives is that generally part of what keeps it in place is avoidance, right? If you think about it, the reason you're not growing or healing is because you have some sort of an avoidance dynamic with that problem. And that avoidance dynamic can look different ways. And so, there's a lot of different types of avoidance, whether it's shifting blame or distracting yourself or, over fixating on one aspect of it, not getting into that place of making changes and seeing it more clearly. Or there's a lot of different ways that we kind of slip into avoidance, productive procrastination, ruminating, getting into a thought loop about it, these kinds of things. And that's generally where most of us stay with this, right? And it's, in the therapy world, they might say something like, a lot of these patterns are really just a way of, as painful or sad or as uncomfortable as they may seem, they're familiar. And because they're familiar, they keep us kind of locked in a holding pattern of familiarity rather than moving into the unfamiliar territory. And here's what I'm going to suggest. Now, in most forms of therapy, to get out of avoidance, they're going to start to move you towards processing the problem, towards whatever the issue is, towards really getting down to whatever the nitty gritty of the pain or the fear or the resistance or the problem is, right? In a lot of personal development work, and particularly in schools that I've studied and what my teachers have shown me, there's another way you can go. So let's imagine part of the problem is that most people are kind of stuck in like a center zone of avoidance that we just kind of like accept unconsciously and we just kind of stay in a holding pattern with, right? Now, what needs to happen in order for you to heal or change is either move into the problem more and start to process the trauma more directly, or move into developing resources and accessing states of being, whether those are mindsets or powerful emotions or skills you have, nervous system skills you have, that can, buffer you and give you strength or resilience or the calm or the clarity or the peace in order to be able to work through whatever needs working through, whatever the growth process is, right? So as an example, let's say you are wanting to develop a part of your personality, like you want to be successful in business, right? The therapist might take you to, okay, well, what's holding you back? What's the problem? Why, what are your connotations about money? What are your core beliefs about your ability to succeed? What were your role models like? What is your conception, right? A coach or a hypnotherapist or a change worker might go into, well, what are some of the qualities you're going to need, and help you develop those in order to be able to move through this uncomfortable period of being successful in business. That might be things like resilience or curiosity, or having a sense of humor and playfulness about the whole process, et cetera, right? So if we move you in either direction, right, it's going to be better than being in avoidance. Because if you're like, I want to start a business, I want to make money, but I keep not doing it. I keep distracting myself and procrastinating, do something else. That's how the problem stays in place, right? You start developing the business and making the money when you either grapple with what's holding you back, or you start developing your resources, or a combination of the two. Now, that might seem obvious, but I really want to mention this here because in a lot of therapy, if you get deep into the psychology world and therapy world, what you'll see a lot is therapists that are really fixated on the problem side of things, on the pathology side of things. They don't realize that there are ways to experience personal resolution, emotional resolution, trauma release, personal healing from going into the resource side of things first and developing and strengthening your resources, and then bringing that back to the problem, right? So a lot of times that's going to be a better way to go. But sometimes for some people, for example, let's say you took a bunch of psychedelics and it's just bringing up the problem in your body, and all of a sudden you're hit with a wave of overwhelm or fear or grief that needs processing. Sometimes that's just what your deeper inner self wants to do in order to move forward. But however you want to slice it, whichever way it goes, if you're moving out of avoidance, you're going to be in a better situation, right? So if you're moving out of avoidance and into engagement, where that's engaging resources or engaging the problem, that's going to move you in the right direction. Okay, and now we come to one of my favorite things. This is the initial thought that really caused me to make this whole video, and why I really do think this is one of those secrets that most lay people don't know when they want to go see a therapist or a coach or whatever, that most therapists, if you go to a therapist training, you're very likely to hear this. It's often very true. And this is the way a lot of therapists think about it, which is that whatever you come in with as the problem, as what you think the problem is in your life, is almost never the problem. There are some rare exceptions where people are keyed right into whatever the issue is, but generally speaking, the common understanding that I hear over and over in my trainings, and especially like in the hypnosis world, they talk about this a lot. The problem that the client has, that they think is the problem, is almost always just the little tip of the iceberg sticking out in their conscious mind that they can kind of see and grasp. But the real problem is something else, much more deep, that's kind of underneath the surface in the unconscious. If you think about it, if you knew what the problem was exactly, you would find a way to, you would logically, rationally, if you already consciously, cognitively knew what the problem was and there was nothing unconscious there about it, you'd find a solution. You'd figure it out. You'd process it. You'd logic it away. You would find a strategy or a set of things to do, to put in place, to figure it out. If you knew what the problem was, you could already solve it for yourself. The reason the problem persists and continues to exist is exactly because it's in the unconscious. And so there are a lot of implications from this that I'll be kind of saying further on in the video here. But I really want you to get this. The problem exists in the unconscious. And this is why, it's continuing to be a thing, and why you probably need support from somebody outside yourself. Otherwise, you would have solved it. Let me give a great little example. So a lot of times clients come in and they think, oh, I've got anxiety. Can you help me with my anxiety? What they don't realize is, I had some, issue in grade school on the playground with a bunch of kids, and I got bullied, and I didn't know what to do in that moment. I didn't know how to process it. And so it's kind of been stuck in my nervous system, and I've forgotten all about it. I don't know it exists, but it's in there. And now I'm, going through life with this feeling of anxiety whenever I'm interacting with people, right? As an example. That's even more linear than a lot of times what it really is. It could be something so abstracted and far away from what the symptom is. You come to a therapist and you're like, I have depression, but really what it is, a childhood trauma, or, you saw a piece of media on the internet, when 10 years ago, and it just stuck with you and stayed in your unconscious and left you with a problem you were never able to resolve. And then over time that killed your sense of inspiration, sense of connection to life, your sense of what's meaningful and valuable. Lo and behold, your whole nervous system just shuts down from the pain, and you end up with depression, right? So these are your common examples. Just to give another example, I got coached recently. I get coaching too, from a peer of mine, and we were doing a bit of kind of trauma healing at the unconscious level. And I picked a problem that I don't remember what the problem was anymore, but I picked a problem, and he started working with me. He didn't even know what was going on inside of my head. He was just leading me through a process. And what came up was something I hadn't thought about at all. I'd totally forgotten about. But when I was a little kid, I was kind of forced into playing soccer by my parents. And we're talking 4, 5 years old, pretty young. And I was, let's say, uncomfortable in that situation. I didn't like it. I was kind of forced into it. I think I kind of didn't understand the game, didn't play very well, maybe, scored a goal against my own team. Or I remember running around with, the shin guards on, and that being very uncomfortable. And just the whole thing felt very stressful to me. Totally forgot all about it. Let it go. It's not a memory I ever access. And this is what came up, as part of this piece of trauma healing. And there was a whole big process my body and my nervous system went through to release that. That was all stored in my unconscious that I'd completely forgotten about. That had tied into, whatever my current issue was, whether I don't remember. It might have been a money thing, or it might have been making a social media thing. I forget. But the point is, a lot of times we have a whole other thing that needs resolving that we don't know. And so this is something you really need to understand about yourself. If you need help with something, it's probably because it's unconscious. And when you go to a therapist or a coach, what they're going to do is have to help you figure out what the real root cause problem is, right? So important to know this. Okay, and on that note, I want to just kind of explain a little bit about the structure of what you're dealing with when you come in with all these problems, right? So like I just said, generally speaking, whatever you experience isn't actually the real problem. It's actually what we would call the presenting problem is one way it's described, or the symptom is another way it's described, right? So you come in and you have a symptomatic issue of some sort. I have anxiety, let's say, for example. Now, for a lot of people, if you're like most people, they come in, they go, I have anxiety. And the coach or the therapist, the hypnotherapist says, okay, great. So, tell me more about that. And the person will have all of these attached, issues around the anxiety. So this might be like self-judgment about having anxiety. This might be disappointment. This might be confusion or overwhelm or fear of addressing it or dealing whatever we think it might be based in. This might be, so in other words, we come in and we have this whole jumble of different issues and problems. I've got this issue and that issue. I've got anxiety, but I've also got depression, but I've also got a bunch of fear and overwhelm. But I also feel socially isolated and disconnected because I have this anxiety. And we kind of get into this whole jumbled mess, right? Yeah. Tell me if this is familiar to you. So we have this whole jumbled mess of issues. And then that's what we bring to the coach, the hypnotherapist, the whatever, right? Now, what you don't realize is these actually exist on different levels, right? So let's say kind of what you, at a medium level, what you're aware of is going to be, let's say the symptom, right? Whatever the kind of basic issue. I have anxiety, right? And then you're going to have what are called meta issues or meta problems, right? So a meta issue is basically any issue you have about, meta means about having the symptom. So I have anxiety and I'm depressed about that. I have anxiety and I don't know what to do about that, and I'm overwhelmed. I have anxiety and I'm totally in self-judgment that I still have this anxiety after 5 years or whatever it is, right? So we have these meta problems that we layer and overlap with whatever the symptom is, right? Now remember, none of that is actually the root cause. So then there's also the root cause underneath it all, which again is unconscious and you don't know what it is, and neither does the therapist or the hypnotherapist or the coach. So we don't know really what the root problem is when you come in. I mean, we can have a guess based on what you say the symptom is, but we don't really know exactly what it is that's causing the issue in your life, right? So but that's all unconscious. You're not going to know until you get into a process. So you've got these kind of symptoms, which is what you know. You've got all these kind of judgments or fears or whatever about the symptom. And then there's the real root cause underneath all of that. So we've got at least 3 different layers going on here. Now, from a coach perspective or hypnotherapist perspective, really what we want to be addressing is the root cause as quickly as possible, because that really reorganizes all the higher level layers from that root cause. So, if you shift the foundation of a building, the whole building moves with it, right? So same idea here. So a lot of times the symptom changes, obviously, when the root cause is resolved. If I have anxiety as a symptom, and what is there as a root cause is my, existential angst around some unanswered spiritual questions I have. That's a common one actually for a lot of people. Then, maybe resolving that existential angst, all of a sudden that anxiety goes away, right? And then all that self-judgment or all that overwhelm about having the anxiety goes away. So we really want to get down to whatever the kind of root cause idea or issue or problem is right away. Now, before we jump to the next section here, I want to just kind of make I want to finesse this point to you a little bit here. I want to nuance this a little bit and create a little caveat here. I'm using the term root cause here. Now, I do think, in certain trainings I've done and certain, teachers I've studied with, the idea of root cause is actually called into question quite often. And I think there's a reasonable case to be made that human beings aren't linear, really, that we are more systemic. We are more like a swirling network of different experiences. We're more like a sphere than like a line, if you want to think of it that way. And so we're a system, and so there may not be a single root cause, because in a system, anything that happens feeds back into the rest of the system and impacts the whole system works. So ultimately, there may not be always a clear-cut root cause, but usually when I'm working with people, I think this is a helpful way to really think about it and kind of organize it. And what I've been finding a lot of times is when we get people into a certain place where there's an issue that needs resolving, whether that's an emotion that needs connecting to, or an aspect of self that needs reintegrating, or whether that's, releasing a certain, anxiety or stress that's been stored in the nervous system, these kinds of things. A lot of times, once we find that point of, let's call it a point of contraction or a point of pain or a point of fear, that a lot of times that tends to reorganize the rest of the system in a healing way. So root cause, yes, no, I think that an argument could be made either way, but I just want to kind of say that so that if in future videos I say there is no root cause, maybe you will have seen this video and you'll get what I mean a bit. But I think, in general, as a simplification of the understanding, I think it's useful to think in terms of, hey, there's a root cause underneath my symptom and underneath all my reactions to my symptom that is probably where the real work is. Okay, enough said. Let's jump to the next section. Getting back on track here then, the next point I want to add here is that obviously if there are these different layers, and there's kind of an unconscious root cause piece here that you aren't in touch with, because if you were, you would, it would be resolved. That I, as a hypnotherapist or as a coach, or if you go to a therapist really isn't going to know what it is either. Then it becomes really obvious that healing and personal growth, personal transformation, therapy, coaching, growing forward in your life, all of these are emergent processes. So this is something I really want you to understand. This is something that I think a lot of people who go to therapy or go to coaches really are confused about, right? There are coaches out there who are very structured in their approach. There are therapists who are very structured in their approach. They often, kind of all they have is a hammer, so all they see is nails kind of a thing, or they have one rigid structure that they like to apply to everybody. And sometimes that really works well for certain types of people or certain clients with certain problems, and not so well for others. But I think if you're really getting into the territory, and as a hypnotherapist and a coach, if I'm really being self-honest with myself about people and their issues and their problems, the truth is that there's no way I could know ahead of time what your memory that you need to let go of or resolve or come to terms with from when you were whatever age is. There's no way I could know what your lived experience is. There just isn't, right? And so there are patterns. Sure, there are things we can kind of, aggregate together and kind of use as common patterns that we see. But ultimately, the work is exploring and leaning into that and discovering what that is, unpacking what that is, and then bringing that healing resolution to whatever that place is in yourself. And so this is something where I see a lot of people who are really desperate for healing. They want that change. They want that resolution. This is a place where they struggle a lot. They get impatient, nervous, anxious, if they don't sense a clear sense of structure or a clear sense of linearity to figuring it out. And I just don't think that that's an accurate conception of this emergent quality that is how the nervous system works, quite frankly, and how healing seems to work in most of my experiences. It is an always evolving, shape-shifting, unpacking, peeling back the layers of the onion, if you want to think of it that way, type experience. And it requires a certain amount of openness and a certain amount of trust and a certain amount of willingness to explore. And so this is really important for you to understand. This is a place where a lot of people kind of get tripped up and start to get in the way of their own healing, get in the way of allowing the coach, therapist, hypnotherapist, whoever to serve them or help them. This is a place where we often can get blocked and get stuck, right? And so you want to understand that transformation requires a certain amount of trust, a certain amount of letting go, a certain amount of not knowing, and ambiguity. Again, it's in the unconscious. If it wasn't ambiguous, then you would have already seen, understood, and known what to do and sorted it out, right? So obviously it's ambiguous. This is all part of the thing. But if you trust the dance and it's like if you are going through dance classes and you don't know how to move your body very well, it's all very confusing to you, but you're with an expert dancer who has expert strength and balance and knows the moves and knows how to teach the moves and lead the moves. If you get really rigid and try to control and whatnot, you can really mess the whole thing up. But if you relax and you trust, that person you're working with should be able to help the emergent process happen in really graceful, safe, healing, positive way. And so this is really, again, something really important for you to understand, because this is a place where you can really slow yourself down or stop yourself altogether. I see it happen. And just want you to know, when you're coming in, your therapist doesn't know. Your therapist doesn't know what your problem is, and they're only going to find out by unpacking it with you. And, and as they unpack it, even what seems like the issue, there may be something deeper or something more specific, and it might take a while, and there might just be like a bit of like movement through stuff in order to really come down to the thing. So you want to trust that emergent process. And I think this is ultimately a good thing to learn in life in general, because life is an ongoing, like a flower unfolding, emerging process. And I think people who are skilled at dancing with life, at moving through life, are the people who understand that emergence is a quality of life and something to be leveraged and embraced and played with, rather than to be afraid of or tried to control, because that's just the organic nature of growth as living beings. Okay, so let's move on to my next point here. Okay, so the next point here is, I think, something that is often overlooked and really important for you to understand. So a lot of times when people come in and they need help and they want to work through something, one of the most common things I hear is some flavor of self-judgment or inner resistance about having whatever the problem is, right? Often, almost always, when a person is stuck and they're like, I have this issue, I don't know how to get past it, almost always there's some form of self-shaming, self-judgment, self-blaming involved, right? And this is, I think, kind of, again, going back to those different layers, this is kind of one of those meta responses. But a lot of times we can have a conflict, an inner conflict between the part of us that has the problem and the part of us that no longer wants to have the problem or wants to progress in life or wants to grow or wants to, mature past having the problem, right? And so there can be a tug of war going on between these two parts of ourselves. And ultimately, what needs to happen, and this is one of the things that a therapist or coach really needs to do in order to get you out of that tug of war that's keeping you stuck, is to get you into rapport with the part of you that has the problem. So part of what your healing process definitely is going to require is some amount of forgiveness, some amount of understanding and insight, some amount of empathy towards yourself, some amount of patience for yourself, some amount of connection, let's call it. Some form of mental, emotional, spiritual connection to the part of you that has been carrying this problem pattern. Because it's only when you are on your own side again, when you are on your own team again, when you're in alignment and not fighting yourself about having the problem, that then you can start to move as a whole piece. That makes sense. Only then can you start to transform, can you start to grow, can you start to shift, right? And so this is a huge place where people are stuck almost always. So this is the work a lot of the time. And so these are all the things that you come in and you trying to talk to a therapist, or you want a coach to help you, attain a new goal, or you want a hypnotherapist to help you get past something. These are all the things going on underneath the surface. You need to be in rapport with yourself. You need to be in touch with the root cause. You need to not be in avoidance. You need to be accessing a resource state or processing through the fear or pain. You need to, realize what the real problem is and be willing to unpack that, and not get in the way by insisting that you know what the problem is when maybe you don't, etc. These are all the things that are actually going on behind the scenes. And part of that is that another way of thinking about this is that let's call it our identity, our persona, our conscious mind, our value system, our sense of self, our sense of who we are, isn't really the totality of who you are. I hope that's clear to you by now. If not, this is always something I can talk about more. This is something you'll hear a lot in different schools of psychedelic, spirituality and philosophy and psychedelic therapy and different schools of therapy and yada, yada, right? We are more, according to most minds and most observers who explore the internal, we are much more than just our identity, just our ego, just our narrative, just our, front-facing persona. And the thing to understand is that though you view the world through a subjective lens, we all do. There's no way you could not view the world through a subjective lens, right? And so what shapes the way that lens works, how clear it is, how, if there are any distortions in it or not, what shapes that is all your formative learning experiences of growing up throughout your entire life, right? So you have essentially a lens, a subjective worldview that you're always looking at life through and evaluating yourself and everybody else and all your lived experiences through, right? And this lens is made up of all the things you've ever learned, every word, every concept, every direct nervous system experience you've ever had, et cetera, right? And so this lens shapes the conclusions that you come to. And this is one of the places where I think psychedelics can teach us a lot. And one of these places where a lot of us are not really tracking ourselves properly yet, which is recognizing that my lens distorts the conclusions I make in a particular way that serves the whole of me. But that doesn't mean those conclusions are necessarily always accurate or correct. That those conclusions are made, if let's say you were born with a set of funhouse goggles, right? Like a pair of glasses that were like a funhouse mirror that kind of warped people's faces and warped the way things looked. And you were born with them strapped to your face. And you grew up all through infancy and early childhood and adolescence with these goggles on, distorting the landscape of everything you looked at and the way people looked and all of this. And your entire lived experience was through this distorted goggles. That's basically what I'm saying happens here. Now, the reason I bring this up is that, when you go to a therapist or a coach, hopefully, if they're really going to help you, part of what needs to happen most of the time is that it's really helpful for you to realize you're looking at the world through a distorted lens and start to consider, what are the wounds? What are the life experiences you've gone through that have warped the lens? And what would it be like to correct those warps in the lens and restore it, bring it back to something a little more balanced, a little more true, that tracks reality a little more, accurately and better. I don't think we can ever ultimately get outside of having subjective experiences of life. Like, if you really think about it, you've never had a life experience that was not subjective from your point of view, ever. And you never will. And this is the human condition, and that's okay. And we can work with that. But it's important to become self-aware about that and realize, oh, I have a warped lens here. So I went through childhood trauma. That childhood trauma warped the lens through which I view myself, warped the lens through which I view relationships, warped my lens through, and my view of politics or people or money or sex or whatever the topic is that we've got some charge around. And, instead of being like, hey, no, I'm right about my opinions and my conclusions based on my warped lens, the thing to do first is correct the warps in your lens so that you're not assuming your conclusions are right and that your lens is accurate, but instead you're healing whatever it is that's been distorting your lens so that you can have a more whole, balanced, clear nervous system through which to process life and information. The way I've experienced this a lot as I've kind of gone about this process is that as I've corrected kind of the distortions of my own lens a bit here and there, what I've found is that things that used to really trigger me or upset me, or that I had like big judgments around, whether it was about myself or about people or about life or whatever, don't trigger me in the same way anymore. I just find that there's a lot more spaciousness inside of me. I find that now that I've worked on some of these issues, I've corrected some of them, I find that I'm self-aware of where the, distortions in the lens used to be. And I realize the way I personally would tend to blow certain things out of proportion or, reduce, marginalize, whatever, in different ways, certain pieces of information, that may or may not be relevant. Right. And so this is really an important piece. And this is, again, one of these things that really applies in a coaching and a therapeutic and a hypnotherapeutic context. If you come in and you're like, and the conclusions you're making out of your trauma, you insist is the way it has to be, and you're not accounting for the way those conclusions are being driven by wounding, are being driven by pain and fear and overwhelm and contraction and stored stress in your nervous system that you haven't discharged, then you're going to make it very hard to heal, because that's obviously the shit that needs healing, right? You're going to make it really hard for your therapist or your coach or whoever to help you. You're also going to make it really hard to really progress past whatever it is and grow and evolve. And so, this is one of those things on psychedelics that I think a lot of times we have these experiences where the medicine leads us to start to learn about perspective and view and cognition and the way the mind works and the different layers of experience. And I think part of the reason that we're often directed to become more aware of that stuff is because it directly impacts, again, we are a system that feeds back in on how we experience, pains of the past and current issues. So this is another huge piece that needs to be really resolved for things to really progress for you. Before I jump ahead, and the reason for that is because you will continue to make the same problem based on the same logic if you're continuing to come from that warped lens. So until you clean up your warped lens, so to speak, you will continue to recapitulate these issues. So you might get the short-term win with a coach, for example, around whatever the problem is. But if you haven't resolved the trauma or the whatever that's driving your distorted fear in the first place, you're going to continue to live from that fear and make other choices in the future that are going to re-perpetuate the problem. So I hope that's clear. And the final piece that's really important for you to understand here is that ultimately, again, I know I kind of harped on this in the beginning, you need to be willing to actually heal and transform and grow. And then I know, again, this might sound a little preachy or pretentious. There are certain coaches I follow here on YouTube that I think get a little overboard about this point. And so I'm a little sensitive about it. And I don't want to come off as being too heavy-handed about it. But you really kind of can't overstate this at the same time. You really have to be actually willing to heal and transform and grow. And I think there are a lot of people who are suffering and struggling with issues, a lot of us out there who are in this place where we really want to be healing, we want relief from the problem, but we are also not actually really ready to let it go, or to transform, or to change, or be different, or heal, or resolve, or, face the sadness, grief, pain, fear, stress that might be kind of stored around the issue, or really challenge ourselves to really expand into feeling good, feeling resourced, exploring what our positive qualities or capabilities are that we can bring back onto the issue. And if we are unwilling, if you're unwilling, even if it's unwilling unconsciously, like let's say you consciously are willing, but your unconscious mind is unwilling to heal or change or transform, what's going to end up happening is you're going to fight your therapist. You're going to resist your coach. You're going to, push back against your hypnotherapist unconsciously or consciously, and end up thwarting your own progress, thwarting your own growth, thwarting your own healing. And again, this is something that's very common. And it can boil down to a lot of different things. Sometimes you have a therapist that's not a good fit for you. You don't feel like they really get you. A deeper part of you doesn't feel safe to open up yet, or doesn't trust the process, or doesn't understand the process, which is part of why I'm making this video. I want to educate and arm anyone who's watching this to know and expect and understand that there's a certain amount of unpredictability, a certain amount of uncertainty, a certain amount of confusion, a certain amount of actually all these other things that you're probably not aware of when you go to a therapist or a coach or whoever, and you're like, help me, fix me, change me. I have this fucking problem and it's unbearable in my life. There's all this other stuff going on that you're probably not aware of, that you probably should be aware of, that's going to make things go easier for you. So that's really what this video is about. I hope it's helpful. I hope that this is something that you can kind of like take in and sit with and go, oh, good point, and really consider, because if you are someone who you're clear, you're ready to change, you're willing to be in the uncertainty of it, you're willing to adapt with the process, you are willing to consider that whatever you think the problem is may not be the problem at all, and that whatever the real root cause is may be something totally different, maybe way less intense than you think, or maybe something that really needs some serious trauma workaround or what have you. If you're open to that whole process and you're flexible about it, you're curious about it, you're, in that place of being what they call coachable. In other words, you're open to working on it, you're going to get much better results. You're going to have faster healing. You're going to have more powerful transformations. You're going to have greater progress. And it's going to be, it can actually be really fun and beautiful and profound and interesting to do therapeutic work or get coached or whatnot. If you're in that space. If you're not in that space, if you're fighting, the coach either consciously or unconsciously, if you are, insisting that what the problem is and you don't know why they're talking about this other thing, if you are, you want to remain in self-judgment against yourself about having the problem, and you're hardened about that, and you're committed to your own self-anger, or you insist on being avoidant, I don't know, and I don't want to find out, and that kind of a thing, you're really not going to get the results you want to get. So consider this, my effort to try to inform you, the audience, the masses, in terms of some of the things that really are going on behind the scenes and that you need to know to really get the full value out of your efforts here. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know. Leave a, do the usual YouTube thing here. Leave a comment down below if you resonate with this. Give, a thumbs up to let the algorithm know if you like it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me down below. If you want to privately email me because you have a question that you don't want to be public on the YouTube comments, my email is in the information down below. And as always, I know I make long videos. If you've watched this whole thing, I really appreciate your time and your attention. Much love to you, whoever you are, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.